I would like to thank my Harvard classmates, Larry Howe and Raymond Sims, for taking time out of their schedule to join me and Barbara on this call. It is one that I'm really, I said to Barbara, I said, well, why am I the right guy to do this? But she reminded me that I'd talked about and boasted about my relationship with John Lewis and, and some other things. So I'm the guy that was asked to do the job. I'm bringing up my screen, so I want to make sure, I don't do this a lot, so I want to make sure that all of you can see my show with no problem. So if you have any problems with this, let me know. Is my screen up or no?
Yeah, you're great.
Yep. All right, so there's some things I want to talk about. Oh, there are two other people I have to introduce too. The first is I made the comment about my lovely wife, Janet, who's wearing the Black Lives Matter shirt, has joined us on the call. But then my really special, I see my granddaughter, Sophia, is up on the call as well. So I'm thrilled, but I'm not sure I see her on the call, but I see that she's listed here. So I'm hopeful that she joins us. So I have a number of things I'd like to talk about, and it's going to largely be about the things that have happened, certainly in my lifetime in the state of Georgia, that makes this election one that, and I'm not talking about just the senatorial runoff, but I'm actually talking about the things that have happened that made the results in Georgia and turning Georgia blue so significant. We'll talk about some of the obstacles and some of the things that people have had to overcome. And then I'd like to talk about the Senate runoff and the things that are going on in order to try and add these two individuals to become US senators from Georgia. And why it's important, not just in terms of the state of Georgia, but why it's important to all of us. But I can't start talking to you this evening without first stopping and thinking about the 300,000 people who've lost their life due to COVID. Today we crossed a significant milestone today. And I looked at the model from IHME. If we are successful with the rapid rollout of the vaccine, they're still projecting 480,000 people will have lost their life by the middle of April. That's another 180,000 people if we roll out the vaccine as fast as possible. If we wear masks and are diligent about masks, they project the number is around 445. So it's still another 150,000 of our fellow US citizens are going to lose their life due to the vaccine, due to the pandemic.
Oops, sorry.
You wanted in the
That's really tragic that so many people have lost their life. And we've seen our lives change so much in this last, 11 months or so. The other point that I want to make before I start is I consider it to be a significant accomplishment that California, and Raymond Sims and my California colleagues, we'd like to thank all of you because today they took President-elect Biden and Senator-elect Harris over the top with their 55 electoral votes today, which I thought was significant, and I was very pleased about that in spite of everything that's happened to get us to this point. I was thrilled today with the vaccine rollout. I was listening to the comments today about 1.2 million doses today that have been deployed and 2.9 million by the end of the week. So I'm encouraged by that. Barbara and I were talking before we started about our frontline workers being the first group to get vaccinated. I was very pleased to hear, I heard this rumor this morning about the White House staff being somehow included in the queue, but I was pleased to see, I haven't always agreed with, President Trump on a lot of things, but I was glad to see that they backed off on the notion of making the White House staff, and I'm not sure who all that included, at the front line to receive the vaccine. So I was really pleased that we kept our priorities where I personally thought they needed to be. So I do think am confident that the end is in sight for the virus, and I'm encouraged about the vaccine, and I've looked at the numbers, and I will be at the front of the line when my turn comes to take it. I think the work that has been done by the scientists, in spite of some of the politics that have been involved, have been tremendous. So I'm very pleased about that. And I don't know what my emotions are about the Attorney General resigning today. I kind of feel like I wish he'd done it a lot sooner, but I'm glad to see. But I have mixed emotions. I'm not quite sure why you would do it 4 weeks from the time the president's term expires, but he did it. I was saddened, and then I'm going to go into the deck here in just a minute, but I was very saddened to see today that when the Michigan electors came to do their constitutional duty, that they were compelled to show up in bulletproof vests. It's tragic what's happened and is happening to our country in terms of how divided we've become over this. I mean, what happened to the day when our politicians could lose an election and with grace and dignity? I used to feel and walk around the country and say, one of the greatest things about this country and this democracy, in spite of its imperfection, was how power transferred from one party to the other. But the fact that our electors had to show up in Michigan in bulletproof vests is scary to me. And I hope it's scary to all of you as well, because it points to how easy it is. And I heard the term about how fragile democracy is. And if nothing else, I've learned over the course of maybe the last year, and particularly the last month post-election, is just how fragile this thing we call democracy is, and how we can go from this democracy where every vote counts to something that feels like the verge of a totalitarian fascist regime just overnight. And how easy it is to get to that precipice of where someone could push us to that limit. I hope and pray we never get there, but it has been scary. So now let's talk about Georgia. And let's talk about why Georgia and these senatorial races are so important. Now, I guess I have to start by just simply saying, Georgia, I lived in Georgia. I was born in Georgia. And I lived through a period of watching my grandparents and others deal with Georgia, where the right to vote wasn't something that people just got to do without giving it a second thought. It was something that people went to great effort to do. They dressed up to go to the polls to vote. They left the fields and the jobs that they had that were sometimes not the most glamorous jobs, to stand in line in order to cast a ballot, because they understood what important right that was and obligation. So let me just go through a few slides that I put together to talk about the whole Georgia environment. So I start with my friend, and I was telling Barbara about this gentleman, and those of you who do not know him, I think most people do. He's gone, but he's never going to be forgotten by most of us. But this was Representative John Lewis. And I have to start with John Lewis in Georgia, but I could start with John Lewis in so many other places in the Southeast because John risked his life in so many places during our civil rights movement as African Americans to gain the right to vote. So when we talk to our African American colleagues in all of our communities, we start with the notion that John Lewis was willing to lay down his life to make sure that we had this right, and we have an obligation to go to the polls and practice and cast our votes. I next turn to Stacey Abrams, and I don't know her, I've never met her, but I have such admiration for her and her whole Fair Fight organization. You know, and she came onto the scene for most of us when she ran for governor of Georgia and just barely lost to Brian Kemp. Now, what we don't think about so much is the effort that Stacey and people like John Ossoff and others have gone through, not just in the last few years, but the last 10 years, 15 years of working with people in Georgia to get people registered, to deal with the kind of issues of voter suppression that we've had in Georgia, and then get people out to vote. Stacey narrowly lost the Georgia gubernatorial race as an African-American woman in a state that historically had been red, and no Democrat had won as a presidential candidate since, I believe, Bill Clinton. And before him, a Georgian himself, Jimmy Carter. So the things that Stacey and her group at Fair Fight have worked for are things that really set the stage for what we've now begun to see as Georgia for sure being purple and in the past election being blue. So her accomplishments in terms of being the face of the Fair Fight movement been tremendous. But it wasn't just her. There were so many other people before her. You know, these two gentlemen, Reverend Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff, you know, they're the primary reasons we're here tonight, because they're locked into a runoff between two individuals, Kelly Loeffler and Reverend Warnock, and David Perdue and John Ossoff. And the races right now are dead even. But we're going to win these races. I'm convinced, based on the data that I've looked at, that in spite of the obstacles, and I'm going to talk about some of those in just a minute, in spite of the obstacles that are being thrown up and have been thrown up, many of them historical, not just new and introduced just because Reverend Warnock and John Ossoff are in the race, but these are things that in the state of Georgia have been things that have existed for long before I was even born, as kind of the standard things that people were doing in order to intimidate people from coming to vote and basically removing people off the polls to make it even more difficult for them to vote. So those have been the practices in the past, but these two gentlemen are going to win their races, and it's up to all of us all over the country to help them get it done. And I'll explain in a minute or two why that's important and how you can help to accomplish that. I put this slide in because I think, you know, it's important to reflect back on this problem. These were a couple of slides. There's so many slides I could have produced. We would have been here all night looking at some of the historical aspects of voter suppression and the fight that people have put on in order to gain the right to vote. Some of them, frankly speaking, are hard to even watch because they were so vicious in nature. And they were so designed in such a way to frustrate even the most committed person to get to the ballot to vote. But we've gone through it. People have marched, People have fought, people have died to make sure that the right to vote was there and available for everyone. So I just thought I would take a minute or two to talk about what are some of the barriers to the ballot box in the short history in Georgia that we've seen. And these are just some of the things from 2012 that we've had to contend with that have made it very difficult for people to vote. You know, for example, we saw the elimination since 2012 of over 200 polling locations that have been closed in Georgia. You know, I know how easy it is for me to vote in Colorado. You know, they just send me a ballot and I just, at my leisure, at my kitchen table, fill it out and submit it. You know, but in Georgia, it's not always so easy. You know, people have to stand in long lines. You know, people are discouraged in the midst of a pandemic, you know, from finding it easy to go. And this is not just in Georgia, by the way. I know that in Texas, they reduced the number of polling places that people could find and could use, even to drop off their absentee ballot. You know, from 2012 to 2016, Georgia purged 1.5 million voters from the ballot rolls. You know, you know, Joe Biden won the race in Georgia by 12,000 votes, but they've taken 1.5 million people off the rolls for no reason other than maybe they didn't vote in the last election. So take away a fundamental right because you just didn't use it is unbelievable to me. 2018, then Secretary Brian Kemp, who's now the governor, by the way, stalled more than 50,000 predominantly Black voter registrations. Just stalled them. Just kept people from practicing their constitutional right to vote. For no other reason than his aspirations to become governor of the state himself certainly made it possible that if these 50,000 additional voters had been able to vote, more likely than not, they would have cast their ballots for Stacey Abrams, and we might have seen the first Black woman as the governor of a state, and not only that, but of a Southern state. It would have been a tremendous thing and a great incentive for even more people to do things. In 2020, the American Civil Liberties Union published a report finding nearly 200,000 voter registrations purged, primarily of young people and people of color. In 2020, primary elections, voting machines, malfunctions called long lines. I got some photos of the lines that I want to show you in a minute, but these are just some of the numbers that have impacted the voters and the ability to vote in the state of Georgia. Millions of names purged, long lines affecting tens of thousands of people, precincts closed statewide, voter registrations being withheld for nothing more than the lack of an exact match, voters being required to cast provisional ballots, insecure malfunctioning machines, votes missing in the lieutenant governor's race, and thousands of absentee ballots being lost or rejected in error-ridden and insecure databases. And this is one I wanted to give you a separate slide on because I just find this one to be really troublesome to me. The difficulty that people who have been incarcerated in the state of Georgia find in getting and regaining their right to vote. 56,000 violent criminals, people who've committed violent crimes, and then people who committed nonviolent crimes, 166,000 not getting their right to vote back. In Colorado, I've talked to our Secretary of State. We have more reasonable rules. And this is something, it's not just Georgia on this point. There's so many states around the country where people who've been incarcerated, and I'm particularly concerned about this one because all too frequently, many, if not most of these people are African Americans or people of color who are not allowed to participate even when they've paid their debt to society. This one is just a chart I talked about before. People just being erased off the rolls, just disappearing, being purged, and sometimes not even being told and aware that they've been purged until they go to try and cast a vote. This is what Georgia looked like if you were casting a ballot in Georgia during the primary and during the general election. This is what people contended with. People were in long lines, like on my left here, trying to cast their ballots. That's what their situation was like. This is just an example in one county, a very large county just north of Atlanta, of what has happened to absentee ballots in terms of the rejection rates that people of color have experienced versus people who are white. And if you look at the rejection rates on the right, you'll see that whites are rejected at a far lower rate than Asians, Blacks, Hispanics, and other groups. But 6% overall, too high a rate on absentee ballots being rejected. And even still, the president of the United States in some of his cases felt that there were so many improprieties in Georgia and people were experiencing the sort of problems they've experienced. So that's just a little bit of the background that we are talking about when it comes to Georgia and the Senate runoff race. Now, I'm going to switch gears and let's talk about the Georgia Senate race and what's important and why it's important. And what people in Georgia are being told they need to do. One, they've asked people because of the pandemic to continue to request their ballots in the mail. And Georgia has a process where, you know, as opposed to some states, you just simply get a ballot like we do here in Colorado. In Georgia, you have to request a ballot. And your voter registration deadline was December the 7th. And today, their early voting in Georgia started. And election day is the 5th. So it is, you know, it's very important in the state of Georgia that we win these races on behalf of the Democratic Party. You know, we're very pleased and happy about what happened with the presidential race and Mr. Biden and Mrs. Harris winning the presidency and the vice presidency. And we're very pleased here in Colorado that John Hickenlooper is the senator-elect from Colorado, and we're very pleased that Mark Kelly is the senator-elect from Arizona. You know, we felt pretty confident about Colorado and Arizona, and we thought we were going to see even more success in Iowa and in Maine, and you know, we kind of held out hope in South Carolina and in Kentucky. But as it turned out, we weren't successful in those. And as it stands today, without these two seats, Democrats will not control the Senate. And we know what life has been like for the Democratic Party during Mr. Obama's last 6 years in office, and certainly how life has looked for the last 4 years under Mr. Trump. So it's important for Mr. Biden and Mrs. Harris and for Senator Hickenlooper and Senator-elect Kelly that they get more help in the Senate. These two races will bring the numbers to 50-50 in terms of the Senate. 50 Democrats, 50 Republicans, and Vice President-elect Harris will be the deciding vote on things that are tied. Now, that doesn't mean that for Mr. Biden and Mrs. Harris, they'll get a walk in the park. It just simply means that we'll have a fighting chance to help Mr. Biden with the agenda. And you might say, what's the agenda? Well, I'm talking about our pandemic distribution response and taking it seriously and listening to the science. I think Mr. Biden has done a wonderful job of talking about how he wants to bring the country together. I think that's going to be a difficult task for him, but he's talked about it. I think we still have an economic recovery with somewhere between 12 million to 15 million people unemployed, many of whom have just stopped looking. But we have to get our economy going again. And I think we have to build confidence back in how we're handling the pandemic and other things. We have to get back and fix our healthcare. We have to deal with climate. We have to deal with immigration. We have to deal with infrastructure. We have to deal with the tax cut. There are a whole host of issues that unless Mr. Biden and Vice President-elect Harris get some help in the Senate, we will not get, we'll see the same level of stalling and the same level of inertia that we've seen from the Senate led by Mr. McConnell and his Senate colleagues on the Republican side. So how can you help? Well, this race, from everything that we've been told, is scheduled to be about a $300 to $350 million spend on just the runoff. And we know that between what Senator McConnell and his colleagues and other people are talking about investing in the race for the Republican candidates, it's going to be maybe one of the most expensive races in the history of the United States. In fact, I was told the ad spend alone between November the 3rd and January the 5th is scheduled to be somewhere in the neighborhood of $300 million. So they need money. And you don't have to be in Georgia to contribute. So I encourage you to really reach deep, and it's not a matter of how much. Whenever you can contribute, you know, if you're like my email was, you're getting inundated with requests for $5 or $10 that could be matched. So getting some help on the finances is critical. There's a phone banking opportunity. You don't have to be in Georgia in order to participate in the phone bank. You see, I've got the photo of Mr. Obama and others doing the phone banking. So that's an important thing that we can do from any place in the country. There's an initiative about vote writing, which is assisting people with difficulty with registrations. Young people, there's a big initiative about getting young people registered and getting them to vote. That's being undertaken in the state. Working again with the felons and trying to see what can be done. And then a big initiative about getting people out to vote. And my last slide, and I started with him, and I'm gonna end with them, is the voice of John Lewis encouraging us to go out and get into some good trouble. And let's go and see what we can do to help Georgia, help Georgia get to be blue. So those are my comments. That's the end of my deck as I presented it. So Barbara, I don't know if we've got time for a few questions or comments, but that's the story about what the history has looked like in Georgia. And that's what we need help with. We need help from all of you. And I know in Indiana, you're fighting a battle, and Barbara shared with me about the environment you find in Indiana, and I'm sure it's very difficult, but that's the lay of the land in Georgia. And with that, I'll stop, and if there's some questions or comments, I'd love to participate. So I'm not quite sure how much more time I have, but that's what I have.